Mohamedou's been around a lot, even while he was still in Guantanamo, of course, because first of all, his book came out. And suddenly people all around the world were wondering who was this clever and funny guy who was, telling these terrible stories about Guantanamo and torture. And then Mohamedou got out of Guantanamo, and and then we started to hear from him in person. And what's been interesting about the last couple of years since COVID arrived is that Zoom has enabled us to cross barriers in a way that we were unable to do before. And I know that we tried to run events in various places. I know we tried to do it in London, and I know we tried to do it in the States, where you would try and beam in a former prisoner from somewhere. And technologically, that was just extremely difficult. Zoom has made it so that now, and particularly for US citizens, you can have a meeting and you can talk to a former prisoner directly. So I've done events with Mohamedou, and I know some of you will also know Mansour Adayfi, who's in Serbia, who's someone that those of us who know him care greatly about him, because he also wrote an extremely powerful book about his experiences in Guantanamo. And unlike Mohamedou, who certainly at the moment is free to travel, Mansour is still trapped in Serbia. But John, would you like to talk to our audience a bit about how you came to make the film?
Yeah, well, I had done a story about Mohamedou years earlier when I used to work at Der Spiegel. And the reason we did the story about Mohamedou was that it was kind of, there were only two Germans and people with a German past who were in Guantanamo. And and he was, and the 9/11 hijackers came from Germany, and, he was seen to be this, major dangerous person who had been, kind of the recruiter of 9/11. There had been lots of reporting on German television. There was on the other public television channel, they had done a lot of what at the time was called original reporting about how dangerous he was and how he had recruited all these people. And it was kind of the era of terrorism reporting. And I remember it really quite well. If you could find really anybody who was connected in any way to the 9/11 hijackers, there was a big story. And it was kind of also an ugly period because it was just, anyway, so this was like 2007. So it was already in the period where journalism was kind of taking a second look at all of these things that had been claimed in 2001, 2002, 2003. And so it was a pretty long story where we, for the first time, really took a look at what is the evidence against him. Is it, what's the basis of it? And we put a lot of it into question. And I know from Mohamedou personally that he really felt that when he was in the skiff room at Guantanamo and read this, it was the first time he had a sense that he was going to get out, because it was the first time that another narrative had come out about him. Because up until then, you got to realize that the German media, was just really had the position that he was, one of the most dangerous people on the planet. So because of that, we had kind of this weird bond, although we never spoke, right? I knew his lawyer well. Of course, he knows his lawyer well. And so we kind of heard a little bit about each other, but of course she wasn't allowed to say very much. But so we kind of knew of each other. And then one day, I'll never forget, on my WhatsApp, I got a ping, and I looked down and it's like, oh my God, it's Mohamedou. And he's like, hey, I'm out. Do you want to come visit me? So, so that's how it began.
Oh, that's great. That's really interesting that he sent you a message, because I mean, you leapt suddenly from this work you'd been doing, which was quite early on, John. I mean, it's very interesting how long it took before it was possible to challenge so many of the the underlying claims that were made by the Bush administration, the ones that have proved so enduring, the worst of the worst. And presumably you went through that whole process of watching Mohamedou's case unfold with, for example, that extraordinary habeas ruling that I think was extremely significant, where, in so many of those habeas cases, but it was so significant in Mohamedou's case because he was a man who'd had, so much thrown at him as to how allegedly dangerous he was. And here was a federal court judge in 2010, basically forensically taking apart the government's evidence and saying, you haven't got a case here, guys, which was extraordinary. And then, of course, was followed by nothing. The decision sent back to the lower courts where no one bothered to look at it, which was, again, extraordinary, but in a really horrible way.
Right. I mean, our story came out before Judge Robertson's ruling. So we were kind of before him. And we actually really, did quite an effort to really research and do as much as we could. And we had someone go down to Mauritania and talk to his family. And he had a brother who lived in Germany. And, we met with the German intel people who were behind some of the evidence and everything. And it just didn't add up. Right. And you'll see, like, that's why I'd be really curious when you watch the film, if anyone, if you've seen it, I'd be really curious what you think about the whole question of Mohamedou's guilt. But the thing that I've always found interesting is that it's like, what is he guilty? What do people think he's guilty of? Is he guilty, of unleashing the bubonic plague in, 1912 or 16? What is it that he actually did? And that's when things start getting watery. There's like lots of ominous connections, but anyway. But I'd be curious of what when we get into a broader discussion, how people read that.
So John, the thing that obviously is the most dominant in the film is that you managed to track down some of Mohamedou's torturers. So I don't know, everyone here, have you already seen the film? Perhaps you could just put your hand up if you have seen it. Okay, so everyone's seen it. So I think, obviously, the protagonists speak for themselves. There are two people in quite furiously angry denial. There's the awesomely conflicted figure of Mr. X, who, watching him on those few occasions where he's grappling with what he's thinking and what he feels and what he's going to say and what he's going to do is absolutely extraordinary cinema. And then the guard who, hadn't done anything horrible to Mohamedou. And it's extremely interesting, obviously, from an American point of view, to have these people talking about, what they did, what they think. Is there a little bit that you would be able to share with the people here about how you kind of found them?
Well, the interesting thing is that in the hierarchy that goes from the very bottom to the guard, Master Jedi, who, by the way, grew up literally homeless and was kind of advised by a social worker to go into the military to get, kind of a stable situation. He ended up 6 weeks after basic training in the cell with, right next to Mohamedou. So he's the lowest level person, and it went all the way up to Rumsfeld, where Rumsfeld actually signed off on the interrogation plan, right? And the only person in that entire hierarchy who reached out and apologized to Mohamedou is Master Jedi. So we didn't find him, actually. Master Jedi found Mohamedou on Facebook and wrote him a message saying, I've been thinking about what I did and I feel horrible and I'd like to apologize. Right. And, to his amazing credit, that was his thing. So finding him was not hard. Finding the others, finding Mr. X, that was a process that basically didn't work. We basically failed. And through a complete bizarre chance, I don't know if anybody knows who Stu Couch is. Stu Couch was the prosecutor on Mohamedou's case. He had taught a law school seminar at the University of Virginia about the Slahi case. And it turns out that someone that, one of his students in that seminar had been in Virginia taking care of his mother and needed to do something in his free time. So he took this seminar. He went back to Washington, where he kind of went back to his normal life, and was at a barbecue, and was talking about how amazingly interesting the seminar was and what he had learned and the Slahi case and all of this. And as chance has it, after we had given up finding him, Mr. X said, yeah, I know a little something about that. And they got into a very deep conversation. And after that meeting at the barbecue, where we figured out who it was, another 18 to 20 months happened before he agreed to talk to us. We had a very long period of sending emails and leaving messages and letters where he didn't respond. And I thought, not responding, hey, that's better than saying no. Not responding for me was hopeful.
Yeah. Well, I also, you can see, he is so not somebody who, he's so conflicted that I'm not surprised it took him such a long time. I think it's extraordinary that he didn't back out of it completely, and that's a very difficult thing to find somebody who's in that position, because I wouldn't want to suggest that it's easy for former guards to come forward and apologize for whatever involvement they had, which generally would not have involved a particular mistreatment of people. But I know from talking to former prisoners that actually a large number of former guards have come forward, mostly privately, but have come forward to apologize for what they did to former prisoners. And I think that, would be interesting. Hopefully that's interesting for people here to realize that it is dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of former guards who have reached out over the years to former prisoners to apologize for, what they were involved in.
Right. The thing is that, Mohamedou had zillions of guards who he met while he was at Guantanamo. But the thing about Master Jedi is that he was there during the period of torture, right? There's a real difference between when Mohamedou was playing soccer with people and was out and running around and, still confined against his will. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying that when the torture ended, it was a very different kind of atmosphere than in the period where he was being tortured. And so those people who were involved in the torture regime, I don't know of them reaching out outside of Master Jedi. Guards later on, yeah, but the torture, people who participated in the torture, I don't know of, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right, John. I think very few people have. And it turns out, that we've seen, I think, over the years with Mitchell and Jessen that, certainly Mitchell seems to actually, he seems to quite enjoy talking publicly about what he was involved in. But obviously there's a massive reluctance on the part of many people. And I suspect that, I think it's so powerful because you could see that personal conflict in Mr. X, that he on the one hand wasn't prepared to acknowledge that Mohamedou had done nothing, but was really suffering from what he himself had done that he didn't think was right. And I think that seeing that is so rare, because I think that torture tends to affect the torturer as well as the person who's tortured. Not presumably in all cases. I'm sure there are some extremely hard and horrible people out there that it doesn't affect, but from the beginning, I remember Jane Mayer reporting very early on, actually, or we probably at that period we were talking about before, John. It was probably 2006, 2007 when stories started to come out. And, and it was about someone that she had heard about who had been a torturer for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And the guy was a wreck. He was, he was suffering nightmares. And, and the point of her article was exactly that. Torture doesn't just affect those tortured, it also affects the torturers. And that's not just the individual human beings, is it? It's actually because the United States embraced torture after 9/11, I've always considered the use of it since 9/11 as being something that toxifies the American soul, if you like. It's seeped into America in a way that is profoundly disturbing, and is such a good reason why one day we could really do with some thorough repudiation of it.
Yeah, I mean, Mr. X, I mean, I am extremely thankful for the fact that he put himself out and was willing to spend time with us, that he was willing to actually delve into it. Of course, those people aren't in the film, the ones who, slam the door, there are others who were a part of the torture team who didn't talk to us. And the fact that he really, I have just a lot of respect for him. And he's spent the last, 18 years thinking a lot about what he did and regretting it. And in terms of his whole take on Mohamedou, he never really knew the file, right? I mean, like knowing the file is not really his business, right? He's there in the night shift. He's not an intel officer in the sense that he's researching the case. He's an interrogator. It's a different, it's a different thing. He just he assumes that what he was told then was true, right? But he's never had the opportunity to actually go out and really look at the evidence.
Do you think this, I don't know, we're waiting for Mohamedou to turn up. Do you think that now would be a good time to open up to questions from people who are here?
Yeah, great. And if anyone has one, it'd be very interesting.
John, in the meantime, anyone?
If you want to, everybody knows how to turn off their microphone, or raise your hand if you want to ask a question. But I'll start because as a filmmaker, a documentarian, the finding of, I guess my question to you, John, would be how the reluctant ones like Sydney and the military, ex-military guy, his name escapes me at the moment. Clearly, they didn't want to participate. Or they were very on the fence about participating. So how did you convince them to participate?
Well, actually, Sydney was very interested in participating. She very much wanted to kind of present her point of view, and we tried very hard to be as fair as we could to how she saw things. I think, do you mean like the former cop, Richard Zuley? Well, I think that the fact that the feature film came out made everyone feel like they wanted to be able to kind of participate in kind of creating the narrative of what happened. And Zuley has a history of being on television. He was in these kind of like real crime TV series in the 80s. He was kind of a well-known police detective in Chicago. I know he hadn't spoken to anyone else, but I mean, I had first actually contacted him back in 2007 and stayed in touch with him from 2007 until, 13 years, right? Of kind of, being in touch with him and off and on, obviously, right? And I think it was kind of after that, that it was unclear really until the very end if he would or not.
It was interesting to me with Zuli, John, that it seemed like he had kind of thought that you were kind of like him, and I didn't know whether you created that impression or he'd just gone with it, because then he turned on you at the end, didn't he? When he's like, oh, it's a stitch up, but he seemed, when he was there in his garage and wanted to welcome you in, and he's like, hey, the guys come and hang here, and I wondered whether you'd fostered that impression or whether it was what he projected onto you.
Well, I mean, I'm originally from Chicago, which I think was, which is like a thing that he connected with, because it's very into the city of Chicago. I didn't contradict, like I didn't get into like a political discussion with him, because I was actually, and we try very hard, and I hope, I'd be really curious if people think it's true or not. I mean, if it worked, to show the utopian kind of thinking that was going on in his mind, right? I mean, he really believed that doing this would bring great good. I mean, he would, and we didn't try to defame him or, we really, and I think that's where the film, if I may say, I think works, is when we show that he's actually got this very idealistic notion of American power and what he did to Mohamedou, right?
Yeah. Well, I think you gave him and Sydney both time to talk, which rather you weren't actually imposing anything on their beliefs. You were allowing them to state what they believed, and and then it's up to us to take what we will from that. And Zuli got to put his, huh?
Did they get too much time? What do you think?
Well,
honestly,
I think for me personally, I'd kind of had enough of Sydney by the end, but because it seemed that she was, because she's fixated on certain issues. So it seemed like, okay, we've heard this before, and she's, we could have heard a little less from her, I suppose, is what I felt. With Zuli, no, he turned on you. You had allowed him to say his side of things, and he didn't really need to do that. It's interesting that he wanted some kind of affirmation that he thought he wasn't getting, whereas in fact what you did was to put it in front of the viewer. We can, anyone who watches the film can make their mind up about Zuli. Was his approach right or not?
Yeah. I'm curious though what other people thought. I mean, do you feel that there was too much, that the people who were critical of Mohamedou, that they have too much space in the film?
No, I don't think they did. I just I've actually got 20 minutes to go of the film, but it's probably finished now, hasn't it? Because I think it ended at 8, but I've literally had 20 minutes to go. So I was literally just at the bit with Zuli. So it's interesting he was just in the hangar and he just turned on you. So it was, and then it was 9 o'clock. So I came on this. So, but I don't think they had too much time. I don't really have any questions at the moment, but just observations. I thought he was really unlikable, but by contrast, there was something quite likable about Mr. X, which I just thought was quite interesting. Zuli, but there was something likable about Mr. X. I don't know if that's the right thing to say or not, but.
And I'm going to interrupt because I'm going to bring in Mohamedou right now. I see him.
Oh, great.
And we're going to let him in. But I would add, for me, Sydney was the most fascinating character. And so the backstory for everybody here is someone told me, I'm the American, I represent Cinema Libre, we're the distributor. A friend of mine told me about This American Life because they knew we were doing a feature film on Guantanamo. And she was like, have you heard that yet? And I'm like, no, forgot about it. And then she asked me again. And so I finally went back and listened to it. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is, I listened to the whole thing. And I was like, this is incredible. And we reached out, and that's how we got involved with the film. And when I finally saw it all, it was like, for me, Sydney was the most interesting character, from a cinema standpoint, because she's just so she just got so much stuff going on there that it makes it interesting. I think for people who, because what we recognize, at least in America, hi Mohamedou, is that, there's just so many people who don't don't still know that people are in prison, but B, think that everybody's there is guilty. So I think by her sort of conflictedness, it helps bring people who might be conflicted in closer to understanding how complicated everything is. I mean, that's a very simplistic, explanation on my part, but again, I think you gave her the right amount of time.
What do you think, Mohamedou? Did we give Sydney too much time in the movie?
Turn on your audio. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I wish I could hear much more of hers, because to me, she really never failed to crack me up. Whenever she spoke, because I mean, there are behind the scenes that you guys don't know about, and I'm sure Jean can, share with you guys more of it. But I was laughing all night, when I had this conversation with her, because it was like so surreal, and I just didn't realize how painful, how much pain she was going through. And this is much more than just me not being dead or not being suffering. It's much more than that, and these kind of people, in any film, that's what spices up any film, to see people with very extreme views. That's why you always see crazy Muslims on TV. You never see a Muslim guy who's just smoking shisha or drinking tea. You always see the crazy Muslim. I wanna kill you, because I think she was very important for the film, to be honest.
Well, what I can say is that in all of the time that I've known you, I have never seen you as elated and as joyful and dancing and giggling was after you ended the phone conversation with her. Sadly, we didn't film this, but we were driving. It would have been great to have had, because you were, I mean, it was like you were, I don't know how to explain it. You were just, I've never seen anyone so happy.
But John, and I just want to tell you, and to this esteemed guest here, this is the first time I decided not to talk to her. I could never decide that in Guantanamo Bay. I always had to sit day after day, listening to her bullshit, day after day, listening to her like wild theories, and I just sat like a stone and answering her questions. This is the first time that I told her, you know what? You can believe anything you want about me, but I don't have to sit through it.
Yeah.
This freedom that you take for granted is not there when American government is, after you, because this is not against Muslim. This happened in Latin America. This happened in Iran before even the revolution was there, And so if America against you, sometime it's really so hard, to defend yourself, because we are just people. We don't have weapons. We don't have the CIA. We don't have the FBI. We're just people. And if the law fails us, we are really screwed. And one of the questions, I just want to add something, and this is not John's, but his colleague, in the podcast, he came back to me and he always said this: the FBI told me that they think you are guilty because you wouldn't answer their question. I told him, I don't owe the FBI any answers. Why should the FBI think that I need to tell them that, oh, I lost my virginity in 1730. This is the first woman. I don't owe them this. Why is it the job of the FBI, their duty to tell American people, you don't have to talk to me. If you talk to me, it could get you in trouble. Why they think this is okay to protect American, it's not okay to protect me, you know? And I do not accept this. You know, I do not accept it. It's time for the people in my hemisphere to enjoy freedom, to enjoy rights, and to be treated with dignity.
So Mohamedou,
Hey,
very lovely to see
yes,
you
man.
again, obviously, after we spent such lovely time together in the UK. So as we have our audience here, what is there anything else you would like to say to them about this film? We've been talking about it a bit before you were here. Anything you want to tell the people who are here that they need to know at the moment, as we're all interested in Guantanamo. We're all still waiting for, you know, for justice for the poor men who are still held there. I wondered if you had a message, Mohamedou.
You know, Ukraine is telling us so many things now. It's telling us that refugees from the Middle East, from Syria, from Iraq are not welcome. But refugees from other parts of the world are welcome. Refugees who look like us, who perceive to be some of us. The first time since like the invasion of Iraq, the first time that America is saying openly they want refugees. Oh my God, on the border to Mexico, people dying. But America wants to receive people thousands of miles away. And I'm saying this, I'm saying I'm so happy for my brothers and sisters in Ukraine that they are accepted. So the other thing that Ukraine is telling us, that America unfortunately has no moral ground to tell Russia, you cannot invade other countries. You cannot invade sovereign countries. America has no right to tell Russia, you cannot put people behind bars without due process, because America is doing the same thing. And this is so disheartening, because I really believe that American people are by and large good people. They are very generous, they're good-hearted, and they deserve better than Guantanamo Bay. Guantanamo Bay does not belong into a democracy. It belongs into a dictatorship. And all decent human beings should band and together, and they should call for the immediate closure of Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah, absolutely, Mohamedou. And you know, I think the only good thing that we can say at the point that we've reached now, after 20 years, is that we have a president who has been receiving advice from people who have suggested to him. It took 20 years to get to this point, that there is something wrong with holding people forever without charge or trial. Imagine that it took this long to get 99 lawmakers to write a letter to the president of the United States saying, we should not be doing this. But it's diverting a little bit off the topic, but just for people to know that in the last few days, there have been 2 more prisoners at Guantanamo who have been approved for release from the prison. So that's now 21, I think, out of the remaining 37 men who have been approved for release. So if Biden would get on with actually freeing them, we would have a very, very small prison population by now, which would surely start to look more and more untenable for the $500 million a year that it costs to keep a prison at Guantanamo Bay open, regardless of how many people are actually held there.
There's one thing I just wanted to add, that we wanted to include in the film kind of the responsibility of the chain of command, feeling that it was kind of in some ways unfair to just kind of target the team, you know, that tortured, you know, but that they were also ordered to have done this. So we started researching, like Rumsfeld was still alive at that point, and we were trying to find his house, right? Because we wanted to go at least ring the doorbell and have, whatever, a servant or somebody, say, he's not going to talk to you. So we started researching his house. And I don't know if people know this, where Donald Rumsfeld, he didn't live there when we were finishing the film, but where he lived while Mohamedou was being tortured. Does anyone know this? It's actually a really interesting fact. He lived in a home in Maryland called Misery Mansion, which in Frederick Douglass's autobiography was a place that slaves were brought to be broken. It was like kind of a center. And that was the home that he lived in on the weekends while in 2003, while he was Minister of Secretary of Defense.
So, John, what happened about trying to follow the chain of command? Because, I mean, I'm just presuming, obviously, none of them wanted to speak on the record. I've always been interested in, and now his name is going to elude me, but Rumsfeld, all the major players in the Bush administration had their lawyers who advised them, and it was Haynes, wasn't it? Haynes was Rumsfeld's lawyer, who left and moved to Chevron eventually. But Haynes has never really had much scrutiny put on him, and yet he's the one that Rumsfeld would constantly have checked with about the legality of whatever he came up with. And we used to hear much more about Addington, who was Cheney's lawyer, and probably less about Alberto Gonzales, because but we did hear about him as well. But I don't think anyone thought he was a very good lawyer.
We had a lot of scenes of us trying to get them, driving by their houses and doing all that kind of stuff. And in the end, we threw it all out because it just didn't, it was just more compelling, the people who actually were willing to interact with Mohamedou and, And that chain of command gets mentioned once by Sydney, where she mentions that, the interrogation plan, the torture plan was approved by Rumsfeld. So I felt whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't a film about the hierarchy. I mean, I always felt it could have played a bigger role.
Well, I think it's just a sign of how they actually, so successfully evade responsibility and accountability for what they set up, isn't it?
Absolutely.
They weren't the ones down on the ground doing these terrible things, they made other people do that.
No, and that's the amazing thing, is that you really see, like, for the, the people that run the United States, I mean, that team, they got thrown away. It's not like they were given any kind of special, they weren't remembered for, anything they did, they're just, anyway.
Everyone here, Mohamedou is with us. Does anyone have a question for Mohamedou? Please ask Mohamedou a question. He hasn't said anything for a few minutes now, and we need to hear from him. We need to hear your dulcet tones, Mohamedou. Julie, Ed, Doreen, anyone out there?
Go with Bert. Bert and Elaine. Unmute.
Okay, can you hear me now? Good. I'd like to say a few things. I think it was Mohamedou who said what I thought was one of the most profound things to come out of this whole issue, which is it's not only the prisoner who suffers under torture. And as we could see in the movie, it's not only the people that were torturing, the torturers themselves, and even the people who are just in the presence of that situation who suffer. But I think it was Mohamedou who said, it's everyone in the United States who knows that we have done this. We have violated our sacred pledge that we will not torture, and we torture, and we do it just because we say we can. That has an impact, I believe, maybe even subconscious in many cases, on the life in this country, which I think is such a suffering country in the spiritual realm. And that is a spiritual issue that Mohamedou identified and spoke about. And I wanted to say thank him very much, and all the rest of you people who have been involved in this issue. I am very grateful as a citizen of this country. And to hear words of wisdom such as that is very important for me. And I think Elaine had her hand up.
Well, why don't we let them respond to that?
Okay, yes.
Because mine is on a whole different question.
And I'd like to come back and say something on a whole different issue also, I think, but we'll see how the time goes. Thank you.
Mohamedou.
Thank you so much, Bert, for this beautiful things that you said. It's very, very heartwarming. I just want to tell you that without brave, and bold and dogging investigation of John, we wouldn't have come here and talk about this stuff. Because unfortunately, this makes me want to cry. After 9/11, the journalists around the world were just repeating the narrative of the CIA of the United States of America. I don't know anyone who questioned them seriously, very few people seriously, among them John, who questioned the whole narrative. And this is very hard. Guys, this is not easy to question, something that everybody, say the same thing. Okay, those are evil people. The US government grabbed them with guns, fighting us, which was not correct. And the CIA, in a very orchestrated way, invited the journalists, and they showed them, how they treat detainees, and they told them, they embedded them, and they came out and they talk about terrorists. I mean, describing people as terrorists without even knowing, what they did. They never had to talk to them. They never interviewed me, and they write articles about it. And later on, I don't know, later on, like when one of the first major article coming out was co-written by Jean, but he had to fight a lot through the system because all the journalists were already indoctrinated. I don't know any other words, for that. And this is a very big tragedy when the powerful country is failing human rights, and the journalists are, cheerleading this human rights violation. We're very much screwed,
Thanks for that, Mohamedou. Elaine, would you like to?
Oh, thank you. Well, what a privilege to be able to speak directly to you, Mohamedou. I've been so moved by first your book, and then every chance I get to hear you live, and I agree that Zoom has just been such a wonderful opening for connecting and learning. So I'm thrilled. I'm curious to know more about your cousin, who, from what I understand from what was in the movie, is the person that basically was responsible for bringing you into going to Afghanistan and so forth. Whatever happened to him? And I hope he's still alive, but and what's your relationship like with him, I wonder?
Thank you so much for asking me this question. So I just want to, to be very clear on this, that the only people who are responsible for my kidnapping and torture and disappearance are the people who did it, namely the United States of America, Mauritanian government, Jordanian government, and Canadian government. Those are the people who are responsible for my kidnapping and torture. My cousin, yes, so what triggered all of this is a phone call that he called me. He's a friend of the late Osama bin Laden. and he's a family member, and he wanted me to help his father who was sick in the hospital, and I did that. And I don't think that I should be tortured because I helped a sick man, and he is now living in Nouakchott. I think John talked to him either or sent some of his colleagues to talk to him, and he's living in Nouakchott. He's okay, and the United States never captured him. They never arrested him. They never took him into custody, and he's just leading a normal life. And I personally chose to be more cautious and not, and I just want to have some healthy distance from, because that was very traumatic to me. I lost my mother in prison. I lost my brother in prison. But, as to assigning the responsibility, is, fall on the back of the United States of America and my government.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me just throw in that we tried to interview him, but we don't pay people for interviews. And so, and he wanted a lot of money.
Oh, and I would just mention as well that that in the narrative that the United States constructed, I would think it would be very hard to find any of those analysts who were so interested in you, Mohamedou, to recognize what seemed to be quite well known, which is that your cousin disagreed with the 9/11 plans. So this was not even somebody who is on public record as having supported it. My understanding is that he split with bin Laden and with the leadership of Al Qaeda over this and was ostracized. And spent, as far as I understand as well, spent many years under a kind of form of house arrest in Iran, but beyond the reach of the United States, unlike you. So just to throw that one in there, it seems to me that there are probably still parts of the US intelligence community who could do with understanding this. But as you know, Mohamedou, this is true in so many cases. There's Abu Zubaydah is still in Guantanamo, who they decided was the number 3 in Al Qaeda, even though other US intelligence analysts that they didn't speak to knew absolutely that was untrue. That's the situation, isn't it, Mohamedou? This is a time when people were abducted on mere suspicion, just an extraordinarily unprincipled thing to do, absolutely barbarically unprincipled thing to do.
Yes, absolutely. And what I really don't understand, the United States is acting in a fascist manner. When you say that, which is also a lie, when you say only American people are deserving of human rights, that's what the US said. That's a fact. It's not a fantasy. And so I don't understand, why should my country and your country, in this case, the UK, support them? Because American government said that people like me and people like you, Andy, do not deserve human rights. They can be put in prison and locked in a cell, and they can be thrown away. We know this is a lie, because American people too, American people's human rights were violated. And I tell people, young people who didn't live through the 90s, I told them, you know that giving your phone on the border is a very new thing. They wouldn't even know that, because now, when at any airport, they can take your phone and see through all your life. And people accept that. That meaning that when you decide to board a plane, you are going to be treated as a criminal for all intents and purposes. Why? Because American people, unfortunately, by and large, accepted Guantanamo Bay and accepted the illegal invasion of Iraq.
Yeah, well, absolutely, Mohamedou. I mean, and they did, fundamentally, although there's a huge amount of ignorance, there has been over the years a huge amount of acceptance that the very principle that is designed to defend us, and on which the United States was supposed to be founded, which was to overthrow executive tyranny. That's what was happening when America was founded, in the perceptions of George III. And, you know, habeas corpus underpinning everything, that there is no dictator who has the right to throw you in prison and throw away the key. And so for that to have been accepted it's like, you know, I can see Julie nodding there. We know how important this is. How extraordinary is it that so many Americans have forgotten how important it is? Bert, I think you said you had another question for Mohamedou, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. And I'm
Please
sitting
go
here
ahead.
debating. Thank you. I'm trying to think how to approach this. I think the issue of terrorism is another example in which that phrase can be thrown out against anybody without any evidence, simply to smear them and to convince some people that this is the worst of the worst. And my background has been over the last couple of decades being concerned about Iraq, because I went to Iraq. I wrote a comment for an article from people I like very much, where I said, if Vladimir Putin is considered an international war criminal because he invaded a small country that had never threatened his country, then George W. Bush equally has to be considered a war criminal. And I learned the number in my investigation of 46,900 children under the age of 5 died in the first 8 months of the war that George H.W. Bush, the father, waged against Iraq, having all the electrical plants in the country bombed so there was no way to process water and pump sewage. I don't say that because I don't want to go off on another tangent, except for the fact that this is clearly an act of terrorism, using the deaths of children and saying, unless you overthrow a man that we decide needs to be changed for our purposes, Saddam Hussein, who actually I discovered did many fine, good things for the people of Iraq without justifying his torture. And I say that because it's another example of hypocrisy in our country, in the media supporting it and failing to pursue the things that you gentlemen have been doing to go against the current of thought, which is in so much of our media. And it takes a lot of courage to stand up and say, wait a second now, by our own rules, this is wrong. And I'm grateful to all of you. So I want to add that, because that's a principle that we in the country can see when it's in the absence of it, when we can just hear a story and say, wait a minute, that doesn't sound quite right to me. And didn't we do this before? And when people try and justify that, it sits wrongly in our minds because of cognitive dissonance. So I think there are these broader issues, and I don't want to go on, so I better not go on. I'll leave it right there. To thank you for that score also, that you are challenging the narrative that anyone just by virtue of being in Guantanamo must be the worst of the worst. And knowing that something is not quite right about that, that affects the entire country here, not just the people who are directly involved or who were there. So I'll end there and thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Bert. You said it. You said it. Amen.
Amen. Is that what?
This is how you say it in sign language.
Oh.
Doreen, you got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question to Mohamedou? Say something?
Well, I was
Or
just going
John.
to say, excuse me. I would just like to say that I apologize to you and to every person that was in that prison. And I'm trying really hard not to cry because it was done in my name. And as soon as I heard about it in 2002, I knew it was bad and wrong. And I lost a couple of friends about it because they were good Christians and they approved of it. So I'm just thankful that you're out and you're okay.
Thank you,
so
Doreen.
much,
And
Doreen.
I hope we really can at some point get to a point where we'll see Guantanamo closed, and we
But
will see.
Doreen, can I
Oh,
please?
sorry, Mohamedou, please.
I just want to tell Doreen and everybody, you know, I'm accepting the apology and I'm accepting it more if the film is promoted and if you can like spread the word. And I want this film to make it, you know, to every house, everywhere, and every award there is, because I just want the truth out.
And on that note, you can tell people it's on Amazon. So people can watch it on Amazon, which most people have access to that as a way to view it here in the States.
Okay, could you please make a tweet or something so I could put on my, I have very big followership on Instagram, Facebook, and etc. and also on Twitter.
Yep,
So
I'll post it from Cinema Libre and I'll tag you in on Monday.
Thank you so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Excuse me, so is that the only way now that the public can access the film is on Amazon?
Well, it's available on DVD on Amazon, and I'm sorry, I should have this right in front of me. I can toggle onto the website really quick. So if you go to Guantanamo Diary Revisited is our website. The website is Guantanamo Revisited film.com. We've listed the sites there. Another really helpful tool to find out where you can stream at least is called justwatch.com. And it'll show you the various streaming platforms in your countries for various film titles. But in terms of the US, you can watch it via the website through Vimeo if you haven't seen it or you're passing it on. But I have everybody's emails here. With your permission, I'll send you all an email with the information if you want to share that on your socials with some graphics. So I will do that since I recognize there's a couple of you guys here in the US. And then Mohamedou, of course, I will make a tweet and an Instagram post on Monday.
Thank you.
And tag me in as well if you can. We'll get this circling, because this Q&A tonight, of course, still, Mohamedou, is a result of a few days of this being a free screening, very, very kindly arranged by you, the studio, to get this, to try and get the word out. So we really need to be getting out to as many people as possible that this is something they need to see, and they really do need to see it. I mean, I think we've all been affected by watching this film one way or another. There's such so many stories going on that are important to hear in this film. From ranging from Mohamedou to his interrogators.
Right, and it's been challenging, of course, because the film came out right after the Ukraine invasion started, and so it's everybody's been so focused on that. It's been hard to get any. We've gotten some reviews and exposure, but it's been hard because everybody's so focused on that.
Yeah. Just as an aside, the film was watched. It was on the main German channel when it was broadcast here, and was over 1 million people watched it. It was on Arte, which also it had high ratings. It's now been nominated for the best German documentary of the year. And the podcast we did was nominated for this thing called the Grimme Prize. And the print story has also been nominated for the European Press Prize. So in Europe, it's done quite well. It's just the place where I was most interested in having residents. It just got started, so let's hope it
Right, and hopefully there's also a television opportunity, which we wouldn't handle, but I mean, that breaks down into film rights and how you access film rights, but technically we don't handle television. So that's with John's partners, but we'd hope that it would have a life as on television eventually as well. On PBS, I think they're going after, right?
I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah. So, yes, but all your support will be a tremendous word of mouth, spreading it around, you know, getting past, you know, people being so inundated with, you know, Ukraine information, which is of course important and crucial. We all understand that, but you know, it's just can't get past it. And Mohamedou, grateful for your time, for joining us. Of course, thank you for doing that. And we're thrilled that you guys were all able to come, and those that were able to donate to help Andy continue with his work. So thank you. And you know, hopefully we'll have another opportunity to all get together and discuss these topics. So I thank you from Cinema Libre's behalf.
And this has been recorded tonight, guys, as well. So we'll have a video, and then we'll have an opportunity to use that to help spread the word as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks for your interest.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Work, John.
I'm gonna end it.
Bye, Andy.
Bye.
Bye. I'm gonna stop the recording.